Hey there, welcome back to the Odd Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Trucks, and today we have on the show Laura Gassner Otting. She's actually the author of a book called Limitless and a new one coming up called Wonder Hell. And today we kind of unpack a lot of things that are tied to imposter syndrome, navigating different situations, your profession, your career, how to go with that moment where you know you've done something great, you feel good about yourself, and like that little monster builds up and goes, what else can you do? But then at some point it trickles into like, oh, but what if you mess up, right? And navigating that journey for a lot of people is a hard one. So sometimes we stay stagnant in our lives. We don't honestly pursue the next level. We don't go to the next tier of life because what if something could go wrong? But the little monster in our heads always see the potential, what could be, and how things could come to pass in positive ways, but it doesn't always lean into it. So today we unpack how that all comes to pass. And she's a person who has great experience navigating this. She's worked in the White House. She's done worked with tons of CEOs at high levels. She's worked with so many different people. I honestly can't even list them all. You'll see it in the notes. She's done a bunch of cool stuff with a lot of cool people. But this is a person who it's very, very worth your time to unpack their heart, their head, their words. And we had a great conversation that flowed amazingly. So tune in and well, let's get to the show. Hello, back. Welcome back to the show. Not back. Welcome back to the show. We're here today with Laura Gassner Otting, and we're going to have a good little conversation. We had a good intro before we actually started recording. You could actually tune in and hang out with us. It was good to be able to hear her perspectives on what we're going to talk about, which is her life and a cool experience of writing a book called Limitless, but also what led to the thought of Wonder Hell, which we're going to have a whole conversation, unpack that. But without further ado, please welcome to the show, LGO. How are you?
I'm great, Anthony. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I'm great now that I get to hang out with you. You're actually my last conversation today. So I'm jazzed up, ready to hang out with you. I'm going to go tune out and be dad the rest of the day.
Oh man, I got to like bring it in for a big close here.
Hey,
It's a
you
lot of
better
pressure.
don't mess it up. You better
I
not mess up my day. No, I'm kidding. Hey,
man, I know. I feel like I owe it to your kids.
yeah, well, they don't care. They don't. I don't think any of them ever listen to my podcast or my shows. It's crazy. Like I do my own thing in the studio, and then I emerge from my cave, and they're like, "All right, Dad's back," and then I live my life that way. So it works. But anyways, I'm excited to have a conversation with you, and I always start this conversation with one simple question. You might have heard it before if you've heard the episodes. But let's say I'm walking around town. I sit down at a coffee shop. This woman sits next to me. It's you. Me and you do not know each other, but for some reason, you feel compelled to start talking to me. In your opinion, why should I listen to you?
So, I've listened to a couple of your shows with some of my friends. We talked about Amberly Lago, Jonathan Field, some great people. And I've been real for like days. I've been trying to think about an answer to this question because the truth, Anthony, is that I'm kind of a raging introvert. So I would
Oh, yeah.
never in a million years turn and talk to you or anybody else. I mean, I'm the person who sits on the plane with like the earphones in, even though they're
Same.
not on, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm, which is funny because I make my living as a professional speaker. I get
I
on
get
stage
it.
in front of
Yeah.
10,000 people, but if I did feel compelled to talk to you, it would probably be because I'm also a raging Jewish mother and
Mm,
you might be sitting having coffee with somebody who's giving you really bad advice and they've gotten
yeah.
up to go to the bathroom. And I just need to turn to be like, man,
Don't
listen,
listen to that person.
like, don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
let me talk to you. And
I
I
like it.
think I would look at you with so much conviction and
Mhm.
certainty and passion about why that person is leading you astray that you would look at me because either you would think that I was right or you would think that I was so unhinged that you would
Yeah, mine
probably
too.
be afraid to not listen to me because you might
Yeah,
upset me.
that's pretty
I
good.
think
That's
that
pretty
might be
awesome.
my answer.
You know what's crazy? Is that I find that's not abnormal. I had a person on the show. His name's Emmanuel Acho, and he actually does a lot of commentating on different. She's written a great book called "Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man." He's a guy that talks all the time. Same answer. He's like, you know what? I don't like talking to people. Not that I don't like talking to people, but I'm not going to go out of my way. And it's interesting because I'm kind of the same way sporadically. Like I'll get in a plane and I don't want to talk to a soul because I just got done speaking. And I'm drained. I
Yes.
don't have the energy to talk to you. But then sometimes I'm curious about what's in your shirt and I'll ask the question. It'll be a conversation. I go halfway through, like, why did I ask? I want to take a nap. So I get the whole dynamic of it. And I'm always curious, like, where did that develop? Now, were you always a person that goes, I have a thought because you decided to be a speaker and share these things? Where did the introversion come in? Has it always been there? Did it settle in the more you got open? Like, how did that kind of come to be for you?
I think I've always been an introvert, and it's funny. Like, I didn't plan to become a speaker. This is a really accidental job for me. I sold my executive search firm to the women who helped me build it, and
Mhm.
I suddenly was no longer LGO CEO. Like, here's my business card,
Like,
and I
mm,
found myself, I was the person who raised my hand at the wrong time in the meeting, and
mm,
I became the chair of a local nonprofit organization that was doing an art auction for its fundraiser. And I was not going to get up on stage and speak because Anthony, like, that's terrifying. Like, I don't want to speak. No way
not
am I going to get up
no,
in front of people and speak.
yeah.
And so a good friend of mine was the MC. Her name is Janet Wu, and she
Mhm.
got up on stage and she said, "Before we get started, I just want to thank my dear friend Laura Gassner Otting, who dedicates her life to philanthropy."
Wow.
And in that moment, I looked down at myself and I was wearing a borrowed gown from one of our like couture fashion
Mhm.
sponsors. And I was wearing these beautiful jewels from one of the jewelry fashion sponsors, all, in pursuit of raising a lot of money for charity. And I
Yeah,
looked down at myself and I was like, oh my God, she just lady who lunched me. Like, I'm a lady who lunches. Like, that's what I look like. Even though there's nothing wrong with dedicating your life to
yeah,
philanthropy, I had dedicated my life to philanthropy, but it was only one dimension of who I was.
yeah.
And I had, I mean, what you call that off shift moment where I was like, oh no, oh no, no, no. So I went home that night, and because I'm super clever, I bought
Mhm.
the website lauragasneroding.com, and I started blogging about things that were bothering me in the world. And the first blog post I put up was
Interesting.
this blog post called that I said, "Stop asking how can I help?" Because we ask, how can I help, when we see a massive problem in the world, and then we send
We
teddy
don't.
bears. We send
Mhm.
teddy bears to kids in Turkey and Syria. We send winter coats to kids in Haiti. We send milk to Japan that doesn't drink a lot of dairy, and we're not
Yeah.
solving the problem. And so I wrote this whole thing that we need to ask a better question, which is the question of how can I, not how can I help, but what needs to happen. And when I
Mm.
wrote that
Mm.
blog post, the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge called me up and said, "Hey, that's a great blog post. You should do a TEDx on it." And I said, "No freaking way.
No way.
I've never spoken in public. I don't
Yeah.
want to speak in public. That's terrifying." And then my kids in the back seat, who are like 12 and 14 at the time, were like, "Mom, don't you always tell us we have to do things that scare us?
Mm.
And don't you
Interesting.
always tell us that if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you? And don't you always tell us
Yeah.
that life starts on the other side of the fear?" And I was like, "Oh, you don't listen to me telling you to pick up your socks, but that
That's
that
one thing
you
you do.
that you've onboarded." So
Yeah.
6 weeks later, I'm on a stage in front of 2,600 people at the Boston Opera House, gold
Yeah.
gilded walls, crystal chandeliers,
Mhm.
giving the most terrifying 12-minute talk of my life.
Oh, wow.
But in that moment, I said something funny, and somebody at stage right laughed. And then I said something powerful, and somebody at stage left went, "Oh, yes." And I was like, "Yeah,
I like
I
that
want
feeling, yeah.
more." Yeah.
Yeah, I get
And
it.
and having spent 20 years in consulting, having to have deliverables and projects and
Yeah.
products, at
Mhm.
the end, I was like, wait a minute, I just go and I speak and I leave and I'm done, and you hand me a check?
Yeah.
Tell me more about this job. So
Yeah.
I never really intended to become a speaker. I was always the person who was behind the person. I worked in politics. I got people elected. I worked
Yeah.
in nonprofits. I helped raise the money for the cause. I was in executive search, and I was the one who was interviewing the person who was going to be the CEO. Like, I was the
Mhm.
one doing the placement, but all of
Yeah.
my stuff was like stage left work.
Mm. Now you're on
So I
stage.
kind of fell into this
Yeah.
in the limelight kind of
I
job,
think that's, in my
very
opinion, the
accidentally.
best people that speak, though. Like a lot of the individuals that I talk to that are all speakers, there wasn't a certain level of like childhood where they saw a speaker and go, "Man, I want to be that when I grow up." It almost never has happened. And maybe has more than, but the people I talk to, at least my personal statistics, is more of like, "Nah, I just was doing this thing and being really awesome over here." And then I got on a stage one day and loved the aspect of speaking because I could, get somebody to get what I'm saying. And people, like you said, they give the ahs and the oohs, and you love
Yeah.
it. And you feel like this fulfillment moment that comes from you giving some thought from some experience you had that no one ever saw, no one even cared about, or even like you felt crappy about, but that vulnerability. And so I think those are the better speakers, the ones who are coming out of it, or coming at it from having come out of something that was trial, tribulation,
Yes.
difficult, hardship, and it turned into something cool. And then,
Yes.
and
And
then
you
what
can feel
happens
that
for you?
passion. You can
Yeah, that's the
feel it,
thing.
right? You can feel, they get on stage and you're like, they're not just giving book reports. My friend Scott McCain likes to call it book reports. The people who get on stage and they give all these ideas that they've clearly read about, they didn't
Yeah,
experience, or they
yeah,
didn't research on
exactly.
their own. They're giving book
Yeah,
reports.
I know what you
And
mean.
then they're the people who are like, "I touched the bottom of the well, and let me tell you what I found there. So you don't have to go there." Right. And you're like, "Oh, okay." It's
Like
like, I'm gonna
Jay-Z
listen to
said, "I
that
smoke
person.
crack so you ain't got to."
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. So you do this. You get this little patch, little bump, right? I'm gonna call it a bump, and not because he's anything with the crack jokes, people. By the way, you get a little bump. You oh, this feels good. What does it look like from there? Because obviously now you're amazing. You're world renowned. You're a number one best-selling author in many ways. But the journey from there to here is one that a lot of people don't probably understand is as difficult as it really is. I'd love you to unpack more of that.
Yeah. So, so what happened is I gave that TEDx talk, which, you give for free, right? I only did
Yeah,
it because I had to
you
like
pay
save face with
sometimes.
my kids, like I couldn't be a hypocrite. So I get up on stage, I give the talk, and then that talk got some attention. And
Mhm.
I got offered $1,500 to fly to Boise, Idaho to speak to their annual nonprofit association event.
Yeah,
And I didn't know it, but I also was going to get a hat with a potato on it. Big
to wear
bonus,
on
right? I didn't
stage.
know that was like a little swag bag they gave me right
Oh
there. So,
wow.
so I still have that hat. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I went out. I went to Boise. I did the thing. I came off stage, and they handed me a check, and I was like,
Mm.
"Wait a minute! I just spent 20 years in the deliverables business, and all I got to do is go out there and talk,
Awesome.
and you
Yeah.
hand me a check, and I like tell me more. I like this job." So I
Yeah.
started trying to figure out how to do it as like an actual profession. And so I did
Yeah.
all the training and I got all the coaching. And then I started noticing people who were getting paid what I considered big money, right? 5 figures and up, all
Mhm.
had books. So I was like,
Mm.
I better get me one of them, right? I got
Yeah.
me one of them. So I call up a publisher and I said, I really want to write a book. And he was like, yeah, that's great. We'd love to do that. But before you do that, could you write this other book that we're trying to do a book series on? And I was like, I don't. He wanted me to do a book about doing work that matters, and I was like, I don't. I did that already. I worked in executive search. I did that. I don't want to do that anymore. And he's like, look, just do it. It'll be like 20,000 words, coffee with an expert kind of feel,
Yeah.
and then we'll publish your book, whatever you want to write. So I was like, okay,
Mhm.
fine. So I start writing this book that's going to be called Consonance: Doing Work That Matters. Okay. I'm
Okay.
like 6 weeks, right? I know you're like, what? So I'm 6 weeks into it and I'm just fighting with this editor. Like
Yeah.
everything I want to write, she's nitpicking and she's wordsmithing and she's
Yeah.
just like moving the concepts around in this way that they're just not making sense. So I called the publisher. His name is Rohit. And I was like, Rohit, this isn't working. Uh, it's 6 weeks. We're fighting. It's not working. You should fire me. This isn't the book for me. I'm not the author. You should fire me. And
Mm.
Rohit says, yeah, you're right. And I went, wait, what? Because like I expected him to fight. I expected him to like at
Yeah.
least give me a little argument, Like,
Not at all,
come
huh?
on. But
Great.
he doesn't. And then he says, but this thing that you're trying to write is actually a bigger idea. And we should do that book as a big
Mm.
idea book in hardcover in April when big idea books come out.
Okay.
And I went, wait, what?
All you
So
had to say, huh? You had 6
yes,
weeks doing that. You could have said that a little earlier.
you could have said it a little earlier, but I mean, and it's funny because in the acknowledgments of the book, I actually thank this editor because if it wasn't for her and me fighting and pushing back, I wouldn't have found my way
Yeah.
to this idea. So I hang up the phone with him and I call my good friend Clay A. Bear and I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? Again, all shift. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
He has this other thing. What am I going to do? He's like, well, how do you want people to feel when they're done reading the book? And I was like, just so sick of everyone being limited by everyone's idea of who they can be and what they can be, and
Mm.
God forbid what they can't be. And I
Yeah.
wish they could just ignore all those people already and decide who they want to be and just live their own life.
Go do it.
And he
Yeah.
says, so you want them to be limitless, ignore everybody, carve their own path, and live their best life? And I
Mm.
kid you not,
That
Anthony,
he said that
six
in
weeks
one.
later, that book
Oh,
was done.
wow. He literally just he spit out all of it then, huh? The title and the sub.
Because he's brilliant. He also,
Oh,
by the way,
great.
is the one who came up with the title and the sub for my next book. But
Uh,
what I tell people is, I wrote Limitless in 6 weeks, but it took me 25 years and 6 weeks to come up with it because what Limitless is based on is my 25 years in politics and in executive search, really trying to recruit the most successful people in the world on behalf of my clients and finding that even though I was calling them because they were super successful, they were calling me back because they weren't that happy. And so what goes into Limitless were all the things that I learned to actually help people be successful and also happy. And we could talk about that in more
yeah.
depth, but
I would
that
love to
book
actually.
comes out.
My next question would be that. I was gonna say, do you mind going into that little pocket?
Yeah,
Because there's a lot
we'll
of
go
space
into
in
that.
there. Yeah.
We'll go into that. So, but what happened with Limitless is that it came out and I hustled my patootie off in order to get
Mm.
that book to come out in some sort of
Yeah.
way that was useful. and it launched at number 2 on the Washington Post bestseller list, right behind Michelle Obama, which was amazing.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a mailing list. There was no foundation on the house I suddenly found myself living in. And so I had
Mhm.
to do all the work sort of backwards in order to make it happen. So you see these
Yeah.
people who are out there who are successful, have the best-selling books, and they look like they've got it all put together. But the truth is that we're all making it up, and every author is a
Yeah.
complete massive pile of insecurity and
Yeah.
uncertainty,
Mhm.
even if they look like they're crushing it on social.
Oh, I agree. I mean, we all know a lot of authors, a
Yeah.
lot, and every one of them to a T. There's always this like, what's working for your book? And there's like 17 ways you can market the book, and so you're like, I don't know if I'm doing the right way, the wrong way, and then what if they don't like it? It's part of my heart, and it's a consistent journey. But though, come on camera and then on these podcasts, this is what it is. It's not to say it's
Yeah.
incongruent by any means, but it's understanding that I think human nature is to have that, but then like the courageous ones we should follow, the ones that can quiet that and go, let me tell you why I wrote the book. Let me tell you the heart
Yes.
behind it when I started. While I may have
Yes.
some anxiety around it coming out right now, there wasn't anxiety in writing it. You wrote it in 6 weeks because your heart said it's time to come out. So when you
Right.
tap back into that, it's something special.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, it took me 2 years to write Wonder Hell because it's not based on 25 years. It's based on
Mhm.
the last 3 years, 4 years of my life. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that we all have a responsibility to be honest and be open and be vulnerable. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I tell people all the time that I don't know what I'm doing. It's
Yeah,
sort
but I
of
think
part
that's
of
what makes it
part of
relatable,
my
right?
message is that it's okay to
Yeah.
sort of not know and to figure out as we go along. Because I don't know. I think that, like, let me ask you, like, the stories that you tell at parties, like, are they the
Mhm.
stories of your most amazing successes? They're probably
Yeah,
not, right?
I don't even have fun telling those anymore. I mean, it's cool experience.
Right.
To be honest, I feel like people are just like, oh, this guy bragging. It's usually the things where I find myself in a corner with somebody who's battling something,
Yes.
and I'm able to access their heart by sharing mine. And that's the
Yes.
stuff that's not always fun and on the top of the surface at all.
Yes. But you're probably like me in that you don't like small talk, right?
No,
Like
I'm not
small
good
talk.
at it.
Like, I
Yeah.
want to care what you're going to do on your summer vacation, but I don't.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
don't. I want to know what matters to you. I mean, I guess maybe the real answer to, like, why would you talk to me in the coffee shop is because I would go so deep so quickly that
Mhm.
you wouldn't like
Yeah.
we would just be in. It wouldn't even
The
be an
right person
option.
would get that. Some people would be like, "Why is she telling me all this?" Other person goes, "Thank you for telling me all this." And
Yeah.
the right person, because I've met people that I've known for a weekend and felt closer than people I've known for 10 years because we finally talked about something that I've never told anybody else, and I've never had someone
Yes.
discover this part, or so you feel deeper and connected. And so there are aspects that there's a beauty to depth that some people even aren't prepared for, though.
Yes, yeah, and it's, you know what I think is super interesting is the people who you should have deep conversations with, some of your family members, right? Like, but you just don't, right? People you've known forever and you don't.
Mhm.
And for me, like, I almost get like ragey, like I get like really,
Hmm.
uh, like
Anxiety,
like,
unsettled.
yeah, it's anxiety, and I almost feel like triggered by it in a way because I feel like we should be closer. We should be talking
Oh,
about real stuff, and we're
yeah.
not. And it
Mm,
just it almost feels like it takes a lot of effort to stay on the surface sometimes
I
and
agree.
not just be
Yeah, yeah.
real.
It's funny because I have conversations. There's a lot of stuff with like my marriage and my life that I share with the world, and so people will tell me that there's these things that they're going through that are similar in their marriage, and their friends don't know, and no one knows, and it's so hard to be around people because there's an elephant in their room, but nobody else
Yes.
knows the elephant. It's like, man, it's a confined space, and while the last thing they want to hear is this, the solution is you got to open up and tell people about it. There's a
Yeah,
humanness to it that you
it
might
is.
find everyone in the room's battling it also.
It's true, and I have found like I am never as lonely than when I'm in a room of people I should be close with, but I'm not.
Yeah. Uh-huh. True.
That's a really lonely place to be because I think that there's about 1 billion miles between being seen and being loved, right?
Mm,
So, like, a lot of us, like, so when the pandemic happened, I just, like a lot of us, I sort of stopped sleeping, right? Like, I had all the stress, and I'd
mm,
been traveling and speaking and like collecting the trophies along the way, right? Every standing ovations and paychecks and like, yes, I'm worthy. Check, check, check. Like,
yeah,
everything's good.
yeah,
And then the pandemic happens, and suddenly I'm not going and striving and achieving, and I had to like sit with my demons. Who am I
yeah.
when
Good to
I'm
be
not
alone, but
again?
feeling alone.
Yeah, like, again, like this sort of who am I when I'm not LGO CEO? Like, I'm sure you were like, who am I when I'm not Anthony the NFL player,
Right,
right? Like, you have
100%.
these moments where it's like, I don't know who I am because I know who I was supposed to be, I didn't even stop to even think if I wanted to be that person, but I knew who I
Yeah.
was supposed to be, and now I'm
Mhm.
not. So now who am I? And so I just kind of stopped sleeping, and I posted something on Facebook about how I at a certain point I was unable to keep numbers in my head. Like if I was doing a rowing workout, I couldn't
Yeah.
remember how many sets at what meters
Oh,
and how
wow.
many stroke. I just couldn't. If I was making a pie, I couldn't remember how many teaspoons of sugar went from when I
Yeah.
looked at the recipe to when I turned around and got the sugar out of the drawer. Like my
It's
brain just stopped
crazy.
working.
Yeah.
Crazy. So I was like, I must be having like slow roll trauma or something. So I went to see a psychiatrist who
Mhm.
diagnosed me as being absolutely, utterly, completely boring and just not sleeping. But he said,
Yeah.
Laura, you're kind of an overachiever. You're a bit of a workaholic and an overachiever. We can work on that.
Mm.
And I looked at him and I was like, Doc, I don't want to work on that. That's a feature, not a bug. Like, why would I
Yeah.
work on being like a striver? And he's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but it's untenable. Like it won't last. And I was like, no, it's great. It's perfect. And he looked at me and he goes, but you're here.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
well, touche, Doc,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
checkmate. And then he said something to me, which was so super profound. He said, you don't have to give the trophies back. And it was like,
That's a big
like
one.
a big one. And I thought,
Yeah.
wow. And he's like, you're still the same person. And then
Mhm.
he asked me something. He said, did you feel loved as a child? And I said, yeah, maybe, I think.
Mhm.
Now, I came from a married, married parents, healthy, everybody,
Yeah.
all the privilege in the world. But it took me a while as I was thinking through this to be like, did I feel loved? Like, yeah, I felt loved, but more I felt like cared for. I felt protected. I felt safe. I
Mm.
felt provided for.
Yeah.
And I came back 2 weeks later and I was like, I think you asked me the wrong question. I think the question wasn't, did I feel loved? The question was, did I feel seen? Like I
Mm.
was loved because I got good grades. I was loved
Yeah.
because I was polite to the neighbors. I was loved because I cleaned the dishes after dinner. I did my chores. But was I seen? Could I like fly my full freak flag and be myself?
Mhm.
Would I still have been loved? Maybe, but I wasn't sure, but I
Yeah.
didn't know. And I think we're all walking around like these like hurt little children who are afraid that if people see who we really are, they're not going to love us for who
Yeah. Or
we
like
are.
us anyway. Yeah.
And that's really terrifying. And what I'm come to now, I'm going to be 52 in a few days. What I've come to now that I've been through what I call the FU 40s,
Okay.
right? Like I am who I am. This is pretty much it. Like I might
Yeah.
get a little better. I might get a
Mhm.
little worse. I'll try to go to
Right.
school in the areas
Yeah.
where I'm terrible, but like I'm pretty well baked in the
Yeah.
pie right
You
now.
don't like the dish, you're not gonna like the dish. It's all right.
If you right, exactly, like it is what it is. I've come to realize that it's not the fear that people won't like us, that they see the real us, that's
Mhm.
holding us back. It's the assumption that those people's opinion actually still matters.
Mm. It's a big one. There's a statement I love. I think I heard Jay Shetty first say it. I don't think he came up with it, but he says, "I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am."
Yes. Yes.
And that's a
Yes. And
different hit.
it is a different hit, and in fact it's he didn't first say it. It actually was coined in something like 1927 by a researcher, and it's called I can't I actually write about it on Wonder Health, so you think I'd remember, but it's
Oh,
called
did
something
you?
like the
Oh, I didn't even know.
it's called like the reflection principle or the mirror
Oh,
principle, and
beautiful.
that is what it is. Like we all
Yeah.
walk around assuming we are this label that everybody else puts
Yeah.
on us. And so
Mhm.
when we're in these moments in between, you call them the off shift moments,
Yeah.
those are the most vulnerable and the scariest moments because we don't know who we are and
Mhm.
we don't even know enough to explain to you who we are. And then we're surrounded by people who either love us and they don't want to see us get hurt. So
Mhm.
don't do it. You're going to get hurt. They're
Yeah.
jealous of us and they see our rise and all they can see is their own stagnation, their own fall, or
It's
they're
already
scared, right? And you run into them at that coffee shop and they say, "Oh no, Anthony, you can't do that. That's too scary." When what they really mean is, "I can't do that. I'd be too scared."
Mhm. Yeah. It's a very
So
common
when we
thing.
don't know who we are and we don't know who they are, like we don't know how to tell them who we are, like we end up like, who am I when I'm around my parents? I'm the person who they last saw live in the house at the same time when I was
Yeah.
17 years old. I didn't even have a frontal lobe then, right? Like, so
Yeah.
when I'm telling them I'm leaving the White House or I'm starting my own business or I'm going to write a book, they're like, "Oh, are you sure you can do that? Like, you forgot to turn in your
Mm.
homework last week." Meanwhile, I'm
Yeah.
52 2 years old.
I get it. Yeah. It's a whole different monster dynamic. Because it's interesting is you do have to navigate how you are around people. And I've had that same battle happen. Whenever I left the gym world of what I used to do to step into this world, a lot of people are like, "Oh, what are you doing, man? You talk and share your ideas and speak on a stage. Like, who does? That's not a real job, you know." And
Right.
you have to battle that.
Yeah, and it's hard, and it's hard, and so many times we hear people giving their opinion
Hmm.
about what we should be and who we should be, and we give these votes in our lives to people who shouldn't even have voices.
No.
And the problem is that we give the same weight of those votes to like the high school friend we run into at Starbucks as we
Yeah.
give to our spouse sometimes,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. How
Why
do you
are we
navigate
doing
that
that?
though? So what do you? Because that's one that I think a lot of people do have. There's this view, but I think maybe with social media, that's being just exacerbated. It's like every comment matters, and I don't think it does. And I think you're anchored on something that I talk about too. Like I take feedback from people I respect, and sometimes it's feedback that hurts. But at the same point, like it's obviously things I got to hear. But there's some people that say things, and I go, sorry, man. I'm glad you felt like you wanted to share that, but that has no effect on me. But how does someone get to that point? How does someone turn off that monster that goes, I got to be accepted by everybody?
Well, so this is really an interesting question. When my last TEDx came out, which is on the idea of Wonder Hell, it's got almost 1 million views at this point, and
Mm,
like something like 20,000 likes and 700 comments, and it's fair to say it's being well received. And yet, there are comments. There was one comment. One guy wrote a comment like, "Why does she talk like that?" So
mm,
I like took it and I put a screenshot of it and I put it up on Instagram and I was like, because that's how I talk, dude. Like
yeah,
that's just
yeah,
how I talk. Sorry. And then Amy Cuddy, who was bullied all over the internet for her presence, her power posing, called me up and she was like, "You have to stop reading the comments. Like, just stop
yeah.
reading them.
Have
It's a
to.
cesspool." And for
Mhm.
45 minutes, she was like, "Promise me, promise me, promise me, you won't read the comments." But it's so hard not to.
Hard.
I can
Yeah.
I can tell you word for word the 1-star reviews of my books,
Mm,
even though there are hundreds of 5-star reviews. I
yeah.
can't
It's
remember a
horrible.
single word of those. So here's what I try to do, Anthony, and because I'm just going to admit to you straight up, I can't turn those voices down. I
Mm,
can't. I can't
yeah.
stop myself from reading the comments. I can't stop myself from
I got
trolling in
you.
the mud. I can't
Mhm.
stop myself from thinking, are they right? Maybe they're right. Maybe I do talk weird. What is
Yeah.
wrong with my armpits in that photo, right? Like all
Yeah.
these strange things. So what I do instead is I try to turn the noise up on the people whose opinions I respect. And sometimes those people aren't as active in telling you how great you are, even though they're showing up for you and they're cheering you on and they're talking to you and they're talking to you to other friends about you. So I will literally sit people down and I'm not going to be like, "Tell me all the ways that I'm great," but I'll say to them, "I'm feeling challenged and insecure because I've gotten these weird comments.
Yeah.
Do I need to go to school on that? Am I like, are they right or am I right?" So I'm not asking for praise. I'm just
Yeah. Yeah.
asking them to just give me truth.
Clarification. Yeah.
Give
That
me a
makes sense.
sounding board. Tell me, like, what do I need to go to school on and what's
Yeah.
horseshit?
That's a good way to do it. I mean, it's a powerful way to do it because I always look at it as that stuff comes out, but I can't. If I get stuck in my emotion, I don't have the emotion to push farther. I stay stagnant here in my life. So I'm always like, well, how do
Yes,
I go forward? And that's a good way of
exactly.
doing it. I used to have a guy that was a college teammate of mine. He is interesting. He used to have his mom send him clippings from his high school accolades so he could feel good about himself. I think it's a different version of what you were saying, but I get that. And I think for me, I've always kind of maybe football taught me this because you're going to get the positive, negative feedback, whether it's coaches or fans or whatever. But I always looked at it as, you know what, like if I'm looking at the individuals I aspire to be, or if I look at people who are doing things at a world class level, they literally have to go out and put their creativity and their sense of who they are on the screen. If they do it on the radio, whatever it is, and my thing goes, there's no way that every time they show up to work to film a new scene, to start a new movie, to an interview and something that something is always amazing in the background. They might have got some weird news, heard some crazy comments, but they still show up as pros and they get that scene done. Right. So I'm like that. I think that's why they get paid so much. I could see why a guy like, Leonardo gets paid hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever it may be, because like it's a lot probably going in circle around his entire world. He has to shut that down and find a way to be here and cry on cue. Like that's crazy, the thought of having to bury those emotions, bury those comments, that feedback, and be so present right here, right now. Like that's a powerful thing. And so I get what you're saying is like you have to find a way to get there. Maybe for them, it's they probably the same thing. Maybe find some friends like, hey, if they don't read the comments, who knows? But there's got to be a point where what's being said about you does not affect the next stage of your life.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of platitudes I could give you, like, if you wouldn't take praise from them, don't take criticism from them
Yeah,
and
all
stuff like
kinds
that.
of
And like
cliche
that's
stuff.
all well and good,
Yeah.
but in the dark of night when you're looking at that
I've been there, I
comment and
know.
they're saying, like she's got a big nose, like
Yeah, you hear
somebody
it.
literally put a comment on one of my TikToks that was like nosy McNose Noserson. I was like, what? Like really? Like you
Oh my
seriously took
gosh,
the
people are awesome.
time to sit down, come up with that, type that out and press send and felt good about yourself. Like, so I often
Yeah,
think like, how much pain
that's
must
for
you
sure.
be carrying around in your life that you
Mhm.
need to lash out like that? And what people say about you has so much more to do with them than it has
Yeah,
to do with you. It's such a reflection on them and who they
I
are and
agree.
their insecurity and their uncertainty. It still hurts.
Yeah,
But
it does.
I don't know. I sort of feel like if you can dilute it with the people who are around you and who will love you up, and you can
Mhm.
and by the way, the way to get people to love you up is to love them
Oh,
up,
yeah,
right?
they
So
reciprocate when you
you
get
got
it,
to
yeah.
like fill that well, because when you need to go for a swim, it better
You
not be
better have
dry.
some in it, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. That's a big thing most people don't do is there's the ones that just leech off everybody around them. Not that they do it intentionally, but there's gotta be a proactive thought of, like, "I gotta pour back into this or I can't pull from it." It's like a deposit in the
Yes.
bank. You can't get a
Yes.
deposit if you didn't
Yeah.
can't get a withdrawal if you didn't deposit in some manner.
Yes.
Man, it's fun. I do wanna go in the depth of, because 'cause we've spent some time in Limitless, the understanding of that and the
Yes.
concept people. But we've kind of alluded briefly to Wonder Hell, right? There's a cool concept within that I'd love for you to unpack because I heard it before we got on. We haven't fully touched into it, but I wanna make sure we spend some time in that. 'Cause that's the next thing you're working on. I'm sure you're passionate about it.
Yeah, it is. So when Limitless came out and it launched as this bestseller, expected three people to buy the book, like my mother,
Mhm.
my father, and maybe my sister would buy it used from my dad, right? Like
Yeah.
I mostly did it because I was getting on these stages and I felt like a fraud, and I wanted
Mm.
to have a thing, a book,
Yeah.
a thing of heft,
Mhm.
gravitas to like, be real.
Yeah.
And and then it was really successful, and Amy Cuddy, who I mentioned earlier, was kind enough to blurb the book before she really even knew me. And so we sent out these press releases. The book was coming out in April. We sent out these press releases in January, the previous January, and the Today Show called the day after we sent them out. And they were like, "We don't know who the hell you are, but we love Amy. And we saw her name on the
Yeah.
front of the book. So we figured we'd check it out.
Oh,
You want
wow.
to come on
Fireworks?
next
Okay.
week?" And I was like, "Does anyone say no?" To that
Yeah.
question. So the book comes out. I do the Today Show. I do Good Morning America. I do all these things. And then I'm on this flight on the way home from speaking at an event where I literally was the opening speaker for Malala, like
Mm.
Malala,
Yeah.
Malala.
Yeah.
And I get on this plane on the way home and I'm on this red eye and I'm like sandwiched in the middle of the center seat, and I can't fall asleep, and I'm thinking to myself like, who am I? Like, what is happening in my life? I like my book is a bestseller and I took a selfie with Malala all in the same week.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's exciting, it's humbling, it's wonderful, but also what else could I do? If I could do that, like, then suddenly I saw this potential of
Yeah.
like, there could be more.
Mhm.
That's pretty exciting. So the work I did opened more doors than I ever thought possible. And as
Yeah.
I peeked through those doors, I was like, oh, there's even more doors that I never thought possible. And not in this like, you got to keep going and striving and bigger, better, faster, more way, just in this like, ooh, that's curious. I saw all that stuff out there. I always knew it existed. I just never
Mhm.
knew it was for me. I
Yeah.
never knew it was a possibility for me. And then when I saw this potential of what I could become, I had anxiety and I had uncertainty and I had imposter syndrome and I had doubt, and I was in hell, right? Because
Mm.
I knew in that moment, that was the moment where this burden of potential walked in and was like, "Hey, Laura, like, what you got for me? Are you going to live up to this newfound you that you didn't know existed last week, last month, last year?
Yeah.
You're gonna let it pass you by." And I think each one of us, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience, right? Like you were you were in the NFL, you saw potential, you saw a possibility, you
All the
get
greatness. Yeah.
injured, you don't get to do it, you become a trainer, but then you're like, I'm gonna become a manager of a gym, right? And
Yeah.
then you start talking to people and you start writing about it, and then you're like, I'm gonna write a book, and oh wait, I could speak on stages, and oh maybe there's
Mhm.
bigger stages and I'll do a podcast. So you keep seeing this possibility of what you could be, but it's not easy and it's not
Yeah.
smooth sailing, and we get so afraid of these moments that we hear them in our brain sometimes as limitations when actually they're
Mhm.
invitations.
Interesting. Frame that. Like, we'll expand upon that. Not frame it, expand upon because I get that, but my brain goes, "Oh, there's more to it." So if you mind
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I found myself in Wonder Hell, I I had the great opportunity of being stuck at home for like
Yes.
the rest of us. So I
Yeah.
found myself in this moment, and I talked to 100 different people, like glass ceiling shatterers, Olympic medalists, startup
Yeah.
unicorns, everyday people like me and
Yeah.
you. And we talked about Jonathan Fields and Amberly Lago, some of your previous guests.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to know how they got through these moments, because we have these moments where we're like, oh my god, it's so hard, I just need to get through this one like stomach churning, butt
Those
clenching
Ashish
fight or
moments.
flight moment, right? I'm gonna get through it and everything's gonna be fine. Everything will be easier when, right? Like we say that, like as soon as I
Yeah.
get that, I'll be easier when. And what I learned from all these people is that on the other side of this wonder hell is just the next one and the next
Over and
one. If
over.
we're lucky, the one after that. So it's not about surviving these moments. It's about actually learning to embrace them
Yeah.
and be excited about them and learn from them, look forward to them and thrive in them. And so what I talk about in Wonder Hell is what happens when you find yourselves in this moment. And the book is actually divided, it's kind of fashioned after an amusement park, and it's divided into three sections.
Okay.
There's Imposter City, and there's
Oh,
Doubtsville,
yeah.
or sorry, Imposter Town, Doubtsville, and Burnout City, and each one of
Interesting.
them has different rides. So
Yeah.
like when you go to an amusement park, you think it's going to be fun, it's
Yeah.
going to be amazing, you're going to have a great time, and then it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're dehydrated, and you're
You want to puke.
sunburned, and you like eat the corn dogs churning in your stomach, and you're waiting
Yeah.
in line for the roller coaster you don't even want to go on. You're like, I thought this was going to be fun.
Yeah.
Why isn't it fun?
Hmm.
And I think we think that a lot about success. We're going to get to this next achievement, and finally it'll be fun. It'll be easy.
Yeah.
And it only gets harder each
It does.
time.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting
And
because I know for me it's a very common thing. Of you, the more you, I guess, the more you accomplish, the more you get a key to access the next hard thing to accomplish, and it's a continuous journey. So if you don't, in some way, appreciate the hardship, it just feels hard over and over again.
it just feels hard. And those are the moments where you have to ask yourself, is this what I want to be doing? Why am I doing it? What am I going to do if all of a sudden everything goes wrong? And so,
Mhm.
the book is it's really shaped around all of these different lessons from the people who I talked to learn how they got through these moments. And one of the things that was so uh, it was relatable to me. It was sort of disheartening, but also it made me feel a lot better at the same time. Was that those moments of imposter syndrome, those
Yeah.
moments of doubt, those moments of uncertainty, those moments of why is this so hard? They never go away. They never go away. So every single level brings a new devil. You're
Yeah.
just accessing a different thing. Like we
Hmm.
talked earlier about people who seem like, they've got to get it all together to like show up on camera. Well, Leo DiCaprio, well, he doesn't have kids, but, you look at somebody who has kids and you're like, they're a famous movie star. They're crushing it. Everything's great. Their teenagers still give them the same sass as our teenagers
Yeah.
give us. They
Same.
just
They're
do it in
human.
nicer cars and private planes. Like
Yeah.
we're all humans. And
Hmm.
so what I try to do in Wonder Hell is to invite people to embrace that ambition of what's going to come next, knowing that it's never really going to be smooth sailing and certain, and
Yeah.
everybody's figuring out along the way. But in that moment where you see this version of who you can be, you really do have a choice. You either can take it as an invitation, or you can say, yeah, I'm going to sit this one out.
Yeah. That's a real good way of looking at it because there's my college coach used to tell me, he said it's never as good and never as bad as you think. So like whenever anything goes up, he's like, calm it down a little bit. Like it never is as good. So don't get all high in your haunches, and it's never as bad. Don't beat yourself up too much. But it is like you do get a chance to like see what the next point looks like. It's I think what you're talking to is like I look at like a Will Smith type thing. Like he's a phenomenal A-lister, right? But he's got a lot of stuff he's battling that's now public, and and that's a world. That's a human doing what he does in this real world. And you're saying like, hey, there's going to be a point where he probably, in all the success he has, it's going to show up and go, God, I don't know if I can do this. It's a
Hmm.
natural part of the human. Now, what he triggers and brings to the table is a little bit different than an everyday person would do to help him keep pushing. But that's in a moment that we all battle. So what can people do in the moments where they go, gosh, I can see that. And I know that if I stay here, like I can have this, I'm comfortable, but I'm gonna miss out on that. I want that, but I have that imposter syndrome feeling. How does someone approach that? How does somebody, I guess, even consider like making the choice to approach it?
I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think the thing that I tell people most often though is, you like everything that got you here may not be what you need to get there, but everything that got you here allows you to stand here in this
Yeah,
place,
true.
in the
Hmm.
center of your excellence,
Yeah.
completely confident, right? So there's a woman that I talk about in the book who has been a very successful author and speaker. She's a business school professor by
Mhm.
the name of Dory Clark, and
Yeah.
she decided a few years ago she wanted to learn how to score Broadway musicals.
Hmm.
Completely different career.
Yeah,
And she
sounds like
shows
it.
up on the very first day of this Broadway musical program that she applied to and got into. And they're
Yeah.
going around the table introducing themselves. And this woman scored 3 shows, and that guy has, written, 16 albums. And they get around to her, and she's like, I've written 3 songs. And she's like hiding in her shirt. And
Yeah.
she said, I either could have said, I'm not qualified to be here, or she could say, I've done other things in my life where I've been successful. I've been able to be confident. So it's
Mhm.
not that I'm not good at this. I'm just not good at this yet. And I
Yet.
wasn't good
Yeah.
at those things originally either. I had to learn how to do it. And
Mm.
once I learned how to do it, I got good. We think that confidence comes from this, like you're just magically born with
Yeah.
confidence, but confidence comes from competence. And
Mhm.
competence comes from putting one foot in front of the other over and over and over again and
Yeah.
failing and getting up and failing and getting up. And once you start doing that, nobody wakes up one day and goes, I'm going to run a marathon. You
No.
run a mile, and then you
Mhm.
run a 5K, and then you run a 10K, right? And you sort
You
of
build
get
up.
to a point where you're like, okay, I could do it. So if you think about the areas where you have been successful and you
Mhm.
like write a list of what you've accomplished, what you've done, what you're capable of doing, some of those things are translatable, right? If they're not directly transferable, they may be translatable to what you're trying to
Mhm.
do, the skills you're trying to do. But
Yeah.
also knowing, thinking to yourself, how did I get to be where I am now? Because whatever I did to get here, those are the things that I need to employ to get to the next place. And so you stand there knowing that it's not that you're not good, you're just not good yet.
Yeah, not yet. I like that. And I think it ties to also the aspect you mentioned earlier of like you don't have to give the trophies back. Like there's a part of us that has had some success and been great. Like I get that in football. I was great in football. Then the game's over and I go, oh, what am I without football? And it's a battle we all have to fight. It's that identity that just gets lost. But I got a client of mine who goes, man, I wanted, he wanted to get into speaking. And I go, it's great. You can do that. And he goes, but I'm not great at it. And I go, yeah, you're not great at it, but you've been a world-class jujitsu artist. Like you have a academy. You don't have a problem being great. You actually, it's just in this area. It's just you haven't gotten great yet. And so I've literally said the same thing: is do not question your ability to get great because you've done it already. And if you can
Yes.
take that from anybody's walk of life and apply it to something new, you've already done the same path that it's going to take for this. It's just a different path.
Exactly, exactly. Like the discipline around creating habits, around
Mhm.
being open to failure, around creating a practice of learning. Like you could apply that to learning how to play the violin. You could apply that to learning how to go jet skiing, right? Like you could apply it to starting a
Anything.
business. You could apply it to anything.
Yeah.
And I talked to a lot of athletes when I was writing this book, and I would say
Mm.
to them, like, man, like, what do you think about when you're like standing at the starting blocks? Like, what do you think about? And the answer was always exactly the same. It was nothing. We think
Yeah.
about nothing.
You're just
They
there.
know, I mean, and you know this, like you pick up the medals on race day, but you won them in practice. Like you
Yeah.
earned your medals in
I call it
training.
dark
You
work. Yeah.
Dark work, exactly. Like in the middle of the night, like I'm a rower, so we're on the Charles River at 5 in the morning. It is cold, it is dark, nobody
Mhm.
sees us, and we're doing pieces there. So
Yeah.
when we are at a regatta, we've already won.
Yeah.
We already did, we did the work, right? So it's the work that
100%.
you do. Navy SEALs say this, athletes say this, like you trust the training. And so
Yeah.
I think if you just think about, that application of habit building and of learning practice and all of that. I mean, if you can get in a ring and fight jujitsu, you can stand in front of 1,000 people on
Anything.
stage. It's far
100% you
less
do.
terrifying.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because you step into that like that's actually my next wave of it. I just got done with some breading stuff today, but it's all the work you do in the dark that allows you to shine in the light. And it's
Exactly.
100% because I look at it and go, why do people have imposter syndrome? I go, I don't imagine that when it came, I don't know, this last season and Tom Brady was stepping out of there, 20 some seasons in, that he goes, oh, I don't know if I'm able to do this. Like, no, he's done so much work in the dark. It's like, hey, let me loose. They have
Yes.
no idea what they're about to see. And
Yes.
so a
Yes.
lot of it, I think, is creating in the background enough daily dark work deposits to where it feels like you can't wait to be unleashed as opposed to like, what if I mess up? It's a different
Yeah.
monster.
Yeah. I mean, you can say trust your training, but
Yeah.
if you
You
haven't
do
done
it
the
too.
training, like
You
the
hang out
truth
under stress.
outs.
Yeah. My brother's in the military. He says it's all about that. He calls it, he says, you do not rise to the occasion, you fall to your training.
Exactly.
And so if you're expecting to rise to the occasion, like you're gonna have that little monster in you that goes, I don't know, because you didn't do any training, so you're falling back to nothing. So you should be worried.
Yeah, I mean, I love that Navy SEAL expression.
Mm,
What is it? It's fast as what is it? Fast
mm.
as slow and slow as smooth.
Oh yes,
Slow as
smooth.
smooth and smooth as
Yeah,
fast.
slow is
And
smooth. Yeah,
they go in and they are just slow and they are deliberate and they
yeah,
are careful.
yeah.
But man, they are like, and they do it quickly, right? Because they have
It is.
practiced over
Yep.
and over and over. I mean, that is you know, I can tell you when I get on stage and I am prepared, it is way clearer. I get on stage and I
Mhm.
fully live into the moment and I
Yeah,
bring all the emotion and I tell the stories if I was there right in that, like I get emotional, I
yeah.
cry, my voice hiccups because I don't have to be thinking about what the next line is because
You're
I'm
there.
prepared. But
Yeah,
for the first couple years I was speaking, I was so worried about somebody like heckling me and being like, "You
hmm,
don't belong here. Who are you?"
yeah,
That I was giving a script
yeah.
and I
It's different.
wasn't being me. And
Yeah,
I think you can tell the difference.
you
You
can. I
talked
think
about it,
yeah.
right? People writing about the thing they're actually passionate about.
Yeah, it's a separation. Whenever I teach people, because I do have some people I coach with like the speaking stuff, and I go, the worst thing you can do is be in your head when you're in supposed to be in their hearts. If I'm on the stage and I'm in
Oh,
my head thinking about all this stuff, I'm never actually in their heart. I'm just reciting things, and they can feel it as separate. If I'm sitting here talking to you and I'm doing this, I'm just like talking about this regimen structure, like repeat. You can feel that, and then
you
there's
can
just
feel
this
it.
waning aspect. And I think it's even if it's not on a stage, if you're talking to a person, if you're just spitting things out that they're not connected and you're not in your heart with it when it comes out, like it doesn't hit their heart.
Absolutely. I mean, before we started recording, you said, I like to just leave my questions through curiosity. And I mean, that's why people listen to your show because you're actually in it. I mean, I
Yeah.
when Limitless first came out, I did a podcast, it's a fairly well-known podcaster, and it's only audio, but we were recording with video. And there was literally a moment where I watched him look up from his keyboard and go, "Oh, wait, that was interesting. Say that again." It was like he
I
just
didn't even
was so
listen.
not in it. And then the second half of the podcast was so much better because he
Yeah.
actually cared. And
Yeah.
I kind of feel like if you don't care about what you're talking about your guests, like then you don't care about your audience. Like, why
Yeah.
even do it? I don't know
I
why
agree.
people even do it.
Yeah. It's a whole other direction of conversation. But thank you.
Yeah, true.
We could bump back that forever. I've thoroughly enjoyed having a time to hang out and talk with you. It's actually been a blast. I usually don't say I just noticed I said that. It's weird. That's usually nothing that comes into my brain. That's so crazy. I notice them because I don't say them so often that they come out and I go, oh, I feel like I want to like swallow that back down. That's gross.
No, apparently there is a study. Oh, and by the way, it's the looking glass principle. I couldn't remember what that thing was, but it's the looking glass principle that I'm not me, I'm not you, I'm what you think of me. It's called
Oh
the
yeah,
looking
yeah,
glass
yeah.
principle. Yeah, I just remember that. Um, there was actually a study, and I think Adam Grant just posted about it, that people who say every once in a while, not
Uh,
every other every other word, but people who say it every once in a while in a conversation actually come across more earnest and having more integrity because they're not just giving you
yeah,
a
yeah,
recited line, but they actually are
yeah,
thinking and engaged in the conversation with you. So we used to think that you should never say, you should never say, any of
yeah.
these filler words. Turns
Mhm.
out every once in a while it's okay. And in fact, maybe it's better.
There you go. I thought it was like
Yeah.
1%. I'll drop a little
Yeah.
bit of
1%.
little splash of it in there. Beautiful. I'm just kidding. uh,
Well played.
Two final questions I have for you. First
Yes.
question: where can I send people to get more information about you, the books, all that great stuff?
Yeah. So my name is Laura Gassner Otting. All my friends call me LGO. So I'm at Hey LGO on all the socials, and heylgo.com is a shortcut to my website.
Awesome. Last question. I'm sure you've heard this question before. What promise did God or the Creator make to the world when they created you?
I think that it's hard to answer that question in a way that is not arrogant because I don't think
That's
the
okay.
creator would put any of us on the planet if it weren't for the better. And
Hmm.
also, I also think we shouldn't be arrogant, which is something that we've been taught by the creator.
Dance,
But
yeah.
I would say that I would hope, at least, that the promise that the creator made when he or she put me on this planet is that I would make other people's lives better because I had a small part in them.
Mm, I like that one. I chew on them. I chew on them every once in a while because they hit me in the right
What
place.
what would what would you say? I've heard you ask this question with a lot of guests, but
Yeah.
I've never heard your answer.
No, I've always kind of had that question be different at different times, and I think that I think that the promise that was given to me was that I would show up in the world as a pattern interrupt for a lot of people that believe
Mm,
that it can't get better than it is, because statistically it's not supposed to be good for me. And I think for everybody, you can attach that part that, like, okay, this is what I got. Like we talk stories, this is where I'm supposed to be. So, but there's always going to be something beyond that. And so I like to be a living example of like, no, this is when
yes.
people meet me, they typically go like, wait, you did what? You're here, and that's what you came through. And I go, yeah, that's where I'm at. And
Yes,
like,
that
how
wasn't
do you?
supposed to be your outcome.
Yeah, how do you get so happy? How are you? How are you doing this stuff? And I go, I don't know. I found this journey, and so I'm a living example of that. I don't even know how to give everybody the background of it because if you go into unpacking of my life, it doesn't make a ton of sense that I ended up where I'm at or I'm doing or am who I am. But with that, I think that that's kind of where I go, what's that promise? And so because of that, I share me as much as I can with the world. It's just living.
Okay, I have to ask you. I know this is like you're interviewing me, but I'm a
Okay.
like I said, I'm a raging Jewish mother, and I spent
Yeah.
20 years interviewing people. So I have to ask: do you think that you are who you are today because of the cards that you were dealt early
Yeah.
on, right? Foster care, all of it, or despite it?
No, 100%. Because there's a way that I look at life where I'm not thankful for what I have had experiences, that happened to me, but I am very appreciative of them. So it's not
Mm,
that I'm glad they happened, but like I appreciate it. There's this painting on my wall over here that says smooth seas never made skilled sailors.
yes,
I love that. I got a little sailboat on my arm on this side you can't see, but
yes.
it's this thought that like, man, there's no way that I come out in the way that I am if I don't have, even if it's just the grit that I had to apply to life because of the early years that I learned to establish and
Hmm.
use further. But yeah, there's absolutely no way I'm this guy without that craziness happening. The problem is a lot
Yes,
of people have all the same opportunities for the hardship to make them something, but they utilize those skill sets that I actually believe are skill sets in the wrong way. So what could be
yes,
great ends up being just another statistic in a wrong way when it could have been a great one.
yes, yes, yes. Well, I'm so glad, as Robin Roberts says, you've made your mess your message.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I do. So I show up to the world and figure out how to share me, but also share the people like yourself. And I enjoy doing it because it makes for great conversation. So yeah, thank you so very much for hanging out with us. I love the answer too is a good one because it's
Oh,
because you are a part of people's lives. That book they're going to read and grab, which you guys should all go read. Go, hey LGO, go find the book, go read it because they need to become a person who takes information and she gets to be part of your life and who knows what life you impact from what's shared with yours. So grab the book. And as always, make the most of your shift moments so you can make shift happen. It's Anthony Trucks and Laura Gassner Otting, or LGO, signing off. Hey, thank you for tuning into the Shift podcast. I pray that we gave something amazing to your life. And if you found this episode served you in some way, I would love if you could share it with people you know, people you love, as well as your community, because you never know who needs that simple little seed that can grow into something amazing for their life. And the actual training doesn't stop here. If you want your free copy of the show notes sent to you after every episode so you can get the major points consolidated down, simply go to textanthony.com and message the word notes. Till next time, make shift happen.